Welcome back to another game of GP Essen. So both players are rolling for first, and seems like Karnatheon is on the play. So Test is on Ruck Tempo. It's the stock list, and as we mentioned in deck list stream, it's not very updated. It doesn't have Mattia, for instance, which it probably should have. And they mulligan their first hand. I think they're probably forced to keep this. Anyways, Karnatheon has a hand with Temur Valdez or Tharvin Building, and then negate. So I think that's a pretty good hand. A bit too many lands, but they can first mate away one of the lands, and yeah, that's one of the main advantages of first mate. You get to keep land heavy hands and ship away one of the lands for an actual card, even if the actual card is a bit weak and slow. So Karnatheon can get a turn 4 Veer if they really want to. Not that they really want to, I guess. And they're going to lead off on Throbbing Budling, which makes sense. Just get out your mana dorks early. And Test doesn't actually have a way to kill it right now, so if Karnatheon draws a 3-drop, they can play a turn 2 3-drop. And Test also doesn't have a Cosmic Sinkhole, so they can't counter whatever Karnatheon tries to play next turn. Unfortunately, they just draw a land, so I guess they can play Valdez and then also keep up Negate. Funnily enough, Test's entire hand has the same mana cost, so Karnatheon is just going to keep up Negate. They're not even going to Valdez. They'd rather play their land tapped. I guess life does sort of matter in this matchup because Ruck Tempo does have a lot of burn spells, and they do have a pretty fast clock some of the time. Test just plays a land and passes. Now they have Veilbore Meddler, which would counter Valdez's Adventure, actually. So yeah, Karnatheon not sneaking in Valdez's Adventure under Veilbore Meddler, probably going to be a huge mistake. And Negate doesn't even counter Veilbore Meddler, so yeah. Karnatheon is going to fetch for a swamp. A turn too late, I think. But yeah, Valdez, Adventure, and Tess is definitely going to Veilbore Meddler this thing, I think. I think Karnatheon was probably thinking about, or they were trying to play around Cosmic Sinkhole by holding Valdez until they had enough mana to... Wait, no, that makes no sense, because they also... If they had 2 mana up last turn, if they played their land untapped, so the only reason that they made this play was to save some life, I guess. I don't think life matters this much in this matchup where you're willing to just play 1 turn behind. And now Test has Cane Dancer, so next turn they can go, I guess, Portal Fracture, and then after that they can Cane Dancer the Portal Fracture. Alternatively, they can upkeep, kill this Fire Bloodling to prevent Karnatheon from playing a 5-drop this turn. Seems like Test isn't going to do that. They'd rather just hold up Portal Fracture and counter whatever 5-drop Karnatheon plays. I think Karnatheon has 5 colors right now, right? No, they don't have red, so they need to fetch a red land off Flooded Depth, which means their pain lands will still hit them. So Karnatheon's going to lead off with Valdez's Adventure and see what's in Test's hand. And Test can't counter this because Karnatheon has too much mana up. Not that Test really wants to counter it either. So Test's entire hand is still all the same mana cost, so Test gets to choose what to discard. I don't think there's anything Test really wants to do in response here, because, like, again, they get to choose what to discard since everything in their hand is the same cost. You can probably just pitch a Portal Fracture, because then you have a Cane Dancer target. Or I guess you can also pitch Rogar's Frenzy, and then flash it back end of turn, or I guess exile it. Or use the exile graveyard ability to make some tokens end of turn. So yeah, now Karnatheon gets to see what Test's hand is, and I'm not sure what Karnatheon really thinks about it. So Test does discard Rogar's Frenzy, which makes sense. They don't want to have a good Rogar's Frenzy target right now, even though Thriving Bloodling is a really good target, actually. Or actually, yeah, discarding Rogar's Frenzy is a bit iffy, because now they can't kill Thriving Bloodling before it gets augmented next turn. So Test will rather just get tokens now. The problem with this play is it doesn't even buff the Veilbore Meddler, so all they're doing this turn is spending 3 mana for 2 tokens, which I don't think is really worth it at this point. I'd rather just discard the Portal Frenzy and end of turn kill Thriving Bloodling and put counter on Veilbore Meddler, at least. Well, now Test has a bounty, Cane Dancer bounty lined up, and I feel like that's probably going to be a really strong play. And yeah, Test swings in with their board. Karnatheon is definitely not blocking here. So Test passes the turn holding up 4 mana. And Karnatheon taps and draws another land. Unfortunately not a basic or a red land, so yeah, if they want to play Veer, they're going to have to fetch a red land with their Flooded Depths, and they're going to get whacked for at least 2 damage off their lands. I guess the question here is, does Karnatheon want to just slam down Veer right now because that's going to play right into Portal Fracture, and Karnatheon knows that Portal Fracture is in Test's hand. So yeah, Karnatheon's definitely not going to do that because playing into Portal Fracture is kind of dumb here. But at the same time, Karnatheon can't really do anything else. I guess they're just going to pass and hold up 2 counter spells. Test decides to fetch the Frostfire Geysers. So are they going to end up turn Bounty, King Dancer, Bounty? Because doing that will put 3 counters on Veilborn Meddler and then put a bunch of pressure on Karnatheon. I think Karnatheon is kind of forced to counter this. Like, yeah, they negate the Bounty and then anti-magic the King Dancer, which still isn't good for Karnatheon because now Test gets on top with 2 Portal Fractures, and actually no, if Karnatheon draws a land, then they can rear through a single Portal Fracture, but not 2 Portal Fractures. So yeah, that is a pretty big problem. And now Test plays King Dancer, and Karnatheon needs to anti-magic it, so Karnatheon has to fetch now, and they get to choose between whether they want to fetch a basic so that they stop taking damage off their lands, or fetch red lands so that they can Thriving Bloodling for red. And they decide to take 2 off their lands so that they can fetch for red later. And Test draws yet another land, so all they have is 2 Portal Fractures in hand, which is a huge problem for Karnatheon because, again, they don't really have anything that can get through the Portal Fractures. I think Karnatheon is definitely hoping to draw something useful here, and that's not what they need. In fact, that's probably one of the worst cards that they could have drawn here because they either wanted a basic land or a red producing land so that they can get a second basic into play and turn off all their pain lands from hitting them. Aratha does neither of those things. And I think Karnatheon is kind of desperate right now, so they probably just want to fetch red and slam Veer, which allows them to pay for 1 Portal Fracture, I guess, and then Test gets to use both their Portal Fractures, but Thriving Bloodling gets augmented and turns into a 3/4, which doesn't even block Veilborn Meddler because Veilborn Meddler is going to get buffed twice by the 2 Portal Fractures. So yeah, I'm not sure what Karnatheon can do to get out of this. I guess they can just pass here, but then they just get whacked by those guys again next turn. Yeah, not a good situation for Karnatheon. Yeah, Karnatheon just decides to pass. They don't want to give Test an opportunity to use the Portal Fractures to buff their Veilborn Meddler. And Test swings in yet again, and draws another Portal Fracture, so they can just sit back and wait. Oh, Karnatheon decides to jump with the Thriving Bloodling. They just decide that it's not going to grow anyways, or it's not going to matter because Veilborn Meddler is going to grow out of Thriving Bloodling range anyways. And let's see, end of all things, that does do something. It still gets countered by Portal Fracture though, unfortunately. So actually, because Test only has mana for 2 Portal Fractures, so if they didn't block with Bloodling last turn, then they could have end of all things and got through the 2 Portal Fractures and killed Veilborn Meddler that way. But then Test has 4 tokens left over from Portal Fractures, and now Karnatheon has to deal with giant board of tokens. So yeah. Or in Voidflare, yeah, that probably just seals up the game. But Karnatheon wisely deciding to wait until the opponent's turn to end of all things so that if they do get Portal Fractured, at least the Veilborn Meddler doesn't get buffed. Karnatheon's just going to take here. And are they going to investigate? I feel like that's definitely too slow. They need to end of all things the Veilborn Meddler now, or else they're just going to die. And yeah, Test is just going to Voidflare, and that seals up the game. So looking at the sideboard, Test can definitely board in more non-creature hate, so Palace Scatter is still the Pandemonium. Actually, I think, and Spell Pairs, so those 6 cards allow them to counter non-creature spells pretty easily. And on Karnatheon's side, since it's a Dreamsight deck, the sideboard matters less since you have so many cards in your main deck anyways. But you probably want to bring in Thought Blossom and Forbidden Treasure because those 2 cards are good against non-creature. Problem when playing against Rug Tempo is that they also have a good mix of creatures, so they're not completely devastating for them, but it's probably good enough. And then you also have Anti-Magic and Negate. Okay, game 2 has started, and Karnatheon has the play this time. So they have a hand with Exon, Tendril Snare, and Lucian. This is probably a keep, and they can first away one of their lands. Meanwhile, Test gets a hand with... That's a really good hand, actually. So turn 1 Panya, and then 2 Rogar's Frenzy plus the Portal Fracture. So both players keep, and Karnatheon is going to first mate their Veer. And wait, they're going to first mate away their Lucian. That feels wrong, because Tendril Snare is going to get them their 4th land anyways, and then they can play Lucian on turn 3. But maybe Karnatheon just thinks that Tendril Snare isn't going to hit anything, and anything that it could hit is going to get countered. But yeah, Test plays turn 1 Crystal Caverns. They're probably going to end up turn Panya, and Karnatheon, well, turn 2, they draw Cosmic Sinkhole, so they can now keep up Sinkhole. They probably want to think about what they're fetching, because they want 2 basics to turn off their pain lands. They also need all 5 colors. So yeah, end of turn Panya. Is Karnatheon going to Cosmic Sinkhole this thing? I think it's probably correct to do that, because Test isn't going to do anything during their turn anyways, so next turn Karnatheon gets untapped anyways. But Karnatheon doesn't do that, so I guess they're planning to Exunt it, which also makes no sense, because if they wanted to Exunt the Panya, then they should have done it before Test untapped with mana up. Yeah, because letting Test untap with Panya just means that you're letting your opponent counter your spell. Or unless Karnatheon wants Test to tap out during their turn. Yeah, that actually makes sense. Because if Test decides to either Portal Factor or Cosmic Sinkhole right now, then they're tapped out during Karnatheon's next turn, and Karnatheon gets to Tendril Snare the Panya and ramp up, but instead Test just lets the Panya die. They'd rather just keep up their counter spells. But fortunately for Test, Karnatheon actually draws a 3-drop that they want to play, and that's going to run straight into the counter spell. And Karnatheon is just going to play their fetch land tapped and pass. I guess they want to play around counters by just holding back Mupuno until they have enough to play with counter backup, but Cosmic Sinkhole isn't very good counter backup, because all it does is make your opponent pay more depending on how much you spend, and you're not really out-ramping your opponent here, with Cosmic Sinkhole at least. I guess if Test decides to use this opportunity to play a tap land, then Karnatheon now gets to drop Mupuno with Cosmic Sinkhole backup. Yeah, and Test is thinking about whether to use this opportunity to play a tap land or use it to play an untapped land and hold up 2 counter spells. And it seems like they'd rather shock themselves to hold up 2 counter spells, which is the correct play here, because now Mupuno is not going to be able to resolve. And raise reinforcements. Actually, yeah, so Karnatheon can fetch for white here, and then they can end up turn raise reinforcements, which doesn't give Test anything to counter until end of turn. But if Karnatheon was thinking about end of turn raise reinforcements, then it's kind of weird that they're fetching right now. So they're probably just going for a Mupuno plus Cosmic Sinkhole, but that's going to run straight into the opponent's Cosmic Sinkhole. Actually, no, it's going to run into Portal Factor plus Cosmic Sinkhole, which isn't great, but at least it forces Test to use both their counters, so Test will be out of counters after this. And then once Test is out of counters, then if Karnatheon draws another land, they can slam down Veer, and I don't think Test can really deal with the Veer on the board unless they have 2 burn spells. Oh, and Test lets it resolve. Oh, I guess it's because Mupuno doesn't really do much right now. It dies to Rogar's Frenzy plus the creatures, and all of Test's creatures are instant speed, so Mupuno doesn't really have an opportunity to hit any of them. Karnatheon is going to +1 Mupuno to play out of range of a single Rogar's Frenzy. And Test is going to fetch right now. They're going to fetch for Mountain. That feels weird, because now they don't have double blue up. And they're going to exile Rogar's Frenzy. I mean, that makes sense, but yeah, I feel like if you're going to fetch here, then you should fetch for either another Crystal Caverns, because you already have a forest in hand. Unless you're planning on playing Rousing Rebel next turn. Or just an island. It's like, what do you need double red for right now? I guess Rousing Rebel later, but okay, and Test draws Solar Flare, so they can kill the Mupuno now. Or actually, they could have killed it before anyways, because you swing in with the Elementals and you Rogar's Frenzy it, but yeah, now they have another Solar Flare. Test is just going to Rogar's Frenzy now. And I doubt Karnatheon is going to Sinkhole that, because Test can just pay for it. Unless Karnatheon wants Test to tap out of Portal Factor so that they can slam Veer next turn, but then Test also has Cosmic Sinkhole, so it doesn't really work out for them if they try to do that. So yeah, Test is going to kill Mupuno with one of their Elementals plus Rogar's Frenzy, and also hit Karnatheon for 1. Now Karnatheon is probably looking at the end of turn raise reinforcement. And New Divide. Okay, so yeah, so now they can if they want to preserve life, they can play New Divide tapped, but they want to play around a single Cosmic Sinkhole for 1, then they can also play untapped, but either ways, they pass the turn, and in end Test turn, they raise reinforcements, force tap Test to tap mana for a counter, and then Karnatheon next turn untaps and slams Veer. And yeah, I think that's the plan they're going for, and that's why they're playing New Divide tapped. Although I feel like they probably should play untapped just so that they can hold up Cosmic Sinkhole after the raise reinforcements. But then again, maybe life really matters in this matchup because Tess is definitely not holding back with her burn spells. And Beoborn Meddler. The Rosin Rebel. So I guess that's why Test fetched. Maybe they don't have a second copy of Crystal Caverns in their deck. Let me check. Well, they're on 2 copies of Crystal Caverns, so they could fetch the Crystal Caverns with that Magmatic Torrent that turn. So no idea why they fetched Mountain. And yeah, there's raise reinforcements, and Test gets to either Cosmic Sinkhole or Pearl Factor it. But now they only have 1 blue source, and they can't hold up the other counter spell. And yeah, that's why I mentioned that fetching a Mountain was so weird there, because now that they only have a single blue source, they can't double counterspell. If they did have 2 blue sources, then they could have Cosmic Sinkhole the raise reinforcements, and then next turn Pearl Factor the Veer. But now they're forced to decide between whether they want to counter raise reinforcements or the Veer that's coming down next turn, or anything else that Karnatheon could potentially drop next turn. Because again, Tess doesn't really know what else is in Karnatheon's hand. Okay, it seems like there was Judge Call, and Karnatheon is actually trying to play raise reinforcements at the end of their turn after Tess tapped out for Solar Flare. Which I guess makes sense because they want to get the raise reinforcements under Test's counters once Test is tapped out. So that does mean that Test will have mana up when Karnatheon tries to slam Veer next turn, but I guess having 4 1/1s is good enough for now. And the 4 1/1s is going to contest the board decently. It blocks the elementals at least, and it's actually a pretty fast clock too. Might be able to outrace Test's elementals, seeing that Test has already used up all of their burn spells right now. So yeah, raise reinforcement resolves because Test is tapped out right now, and let's see how Test deals with the 4 1/1 tokens. Yeah, they're going to play Rousing Rebel tapped, and they're just going to pass a turn. So they're holding up Full Fracture, Cosmic Sinkhole, and Beoborn Meddler, but they can only play one of these guys because they only have 1 blue source. I don't think it really matters because Test can really only, Test can't really fight back against any one of these counters. The Conjuring Eyes, Karnatheon's on 5 lands right now, so if they try to conjure it, it's going to get countered by Portal Fracture. So they can't really play around Test's counter spells right now, so I think it's probably just best for them to run one of their spells into a counter spell just to get it out of Test's hand. Either ways, Karnatheon is going to attack here, and they're going to swing out, which makes sense because they have 4 1/1s, they might as well attack. And Test can't really afford to start swinging with Rousing Rebel either because that taps him out, and then Karnatheon can drop something really nasty. Then Test is just going to take all of that. I guess Test can do end of turn Beoborn Meddler and then try to win the race that way. Assuming Karnatheon doesn't do anything now. But Karnatheon is going to Conjure Realities, I think. Yeah, they're going to Conjure Realities, and I think Test is just going to counter that with Portal Fracture. And that actually makes 2 tokens, so now Test and Karnatheon are even on the board. So now, actually Karnatheon winning the race. I don't think any players winning the race in particular. Actually, Test is probably the aggressor here because they can just flash in more creatures to attack. So yeah, Test swings in with everything, knocks Karnatheon down to 10, and just passes, holding up one of their blue spells. Karnatheon draws Nebula, so that's 6 mana. Cosmic Sinkhole is kind of useless here because Karnatheon can't really play something and Cosmic Sinkhole in the same turn. So they're just going to swing with everything, I think. Yeah. They probably tried to slam Veer this turn, but it's going to get countered. And I think that probably steals the game because, yeah, if Karnatheon tries to play Veer, then Test gets a Portal Fracture it, and that counters it and makes 2 more tokens. So now Test is looking at... Actually, they just have lethal if that happens because Rousing Rebel can swing for 4. So yeah, if Karnatheon plays Veer, they just lose. They don't play Veer, then they do nothing this turn and probably still lose. So yeah, it's a pretty lose-lose situation for Karnatheon right now. I feel like maybe they should have just... Oh, they're going to Tendril Snare now, which is actually a pretty interesting play because playing Tendril Snare will put them up a land. So next turn they get to... Test is going to counter that. That's extremely interesting. I guess Karnatheon is trying to bait out the counter with Tendril Snare, and Test is going to Portal Fracture now. So if Karnatheon did have a 3-drop in hand, or I guess a 4-drop with a land in hand, then this play would have been really risky for Test, because now they don't have any way to counter Karnatheon's 4-drop/3 drop. But the news for Test is that this play paid off because Karnatheon doesn't have anything else to drop in hand. Karnatheon is just going to let Tendril Snare get countered. Oh no, they're going to pay for it. So does that put them? Yeah, that puts Test off lethal for a turn. But now Karnatheon needs a way to come back into the game after going down to 1. And Test does still have a Cosmic Synchro, and the Tendril Snare is going to fetch them on island. So yeah, now they have 2 counter spells. And the Cosmic Synchro in Karnatheon's hand is pretty useless right now. Oh no. Okay, yeah, Karnatheon just accidentally gave their opponent lethal. Yeah. Right, Rogar's Frenzy. Never mind, Test had lethal anyways. So it didn't matter in the end. I think the only way Karnatheon could have not died there was to not attack, I guess. But yeah. So seems like Temur Tempo manages to beat Dreamsight pretty firmly, actually.